this is Angelia, and you're listening to or watching the podcast, Why You Do What You Do. The podcast that talks about psychology and human development to maybe help you figure out a little bit more about why you do what you do. We were talking about, back in the old medieval times, how they thought, there were spirits that needed to come out of your head, and they were drilling holes in people, and, scary stuff. And then how, they started thinking about mental disorders, and the pathology that was localized in the brain. They start figuring out, if you get a problem in your head, you get a problem in your head. So, this may have featured an interest in the brain that took hold at that time. And of course, the last time we were talking about was in, the late 1600s. The Renaissance time, where they were like, oh, well, maybe all this is in the brain. There was a growing awareness that the brain has a critical role to play in every aspect of human function. And of course, we know it does. The lower part of your brain, people call it the crocodilian part, is in charge of your autonomic functions. Without it, you don't breathe, your heart don't beat, etc. The higher part of our brain, which we have a large part and we're supposed to be able to use it, controls your thought processes, your memory, and your analytical way of doing things. So, and also the right side is more towards your creative side, creating and imagining. So, your brain is in charge of everything. It's the central computer. It's the CPU. So, we today are so accustomed to accepting the brain's importance as a fact that it is difficult to believe that this is a fairly recent realization. In 1757, Albrecht von Haller suggested that dissecting the brain of dead mental patients, might provide clues about what had caused their disturbance, because they were sure it would be a physical thing, that they could see. They were still not up on the fact, that you have the neuron connections, the dendrites, the electrical pathways where, these things are firing in the neurons and, thinking is happening. We're still looking at the gross anatomy of the brain. In 1845, so we're over 100 years later, William Greisinger presented the argument that all abnormal behavior was indeed caused by organic malfunction of the brain. But it was not until 1883, so 40 more years later, that one of Greisinger's students developed a systematic classification schema that linked psychological problems with the organic diseased brain model. So they're starting to figure this out. In the late 1800s, they started to put two and two together and saying, oh, okay. Kraepelin's classification system. Emil Kraepelin was the first to systematize the prevailing belief that behavioral disturbances should be regarded as diseases. And that's why we think about it like that today. Prior to the late 1800s, you were just mad or crazy or whatever. Now, because we had great-grandparents or whoever back in that day who used these words, they still exist today. They've traveled down through the families, and you're crazy, you're nuts, whatever, but people are mentally ill, so that's how you should phrase that. Believing firmly in Greisinger's theory, Kraepelin wanted his system to validate the organic viewpoint, because, they were thinking like, well, if you have heart disease, then that's a problem, from there. If you have brain disease, that's a problem, from there. And so, that made sense, more sense than your humors or, you need to drill a hole in the skull to let the evil out. So, we made some progress there, thankfully. His central task was to describe and classify the various mental disturbances, the basis of his schema being empirical, that is, it was based on overt behavior, since Kraepelin was naturally concerned with the reliability of his categories, which, if you're going to develop a system, you should be concerned with the reliability of it. Your research, whatever. Many regard the work of Kraepelin as the start of the scientific age in understanding mental illness, and he is often termed the father of modern psychiatry. Of course, we know good old Freud was the father of modern psychology. So, although others may disagree, the fact is that our current diagnostic schema is a logical outgrowth of his early accomplishment. The DSM-3 is clearly based on Kraepelin's model. Of course, now I forget what number we're on, but we're on a higher number than that. Specifically, Kraepelin's argument had two major points. Number one, people should be sorted into groups based on similar observable symptoms or problematic behaviors. Number two, only those symptoms that occur regularly, alone or in combination with others, and in a predictable sequence should be used. Drawing from data he had collected, Kraepelin devised two primary categories that together accounted for roughly 2/3 of all the patients. Let me see if I can make this light work a little bit so I'm not in shadow so much. I don't look so much like a vampire. Halloween's over. Although others, okay, we got that far. Let's see. The theories that together accounted for roughly 2/3 of all the patients then in mental hospitals. Of course, we know mental hospitals of the 1800s were not a fun place. Manic-Depressive Psychosis and Dementia Praecox. Manic-Depressive Psychosis. The syndrome involved two opposite states: depression and mania, or elation. Now today, a lot of people still describe it as manic-depressive. Even my parents' generation, that's what it was called. And now, of course, it's mostly called bipolar. So, and I know a few people who've been diagnosed with that. Using hospital records as well as empirical studies, Kraepelin observed the episodes of each of these states seem to alternate in the same individual. So, back and forth. That might be a little too bright, I think, but that's just my opinion. We all, if you know somebody who has bipolar, you know that sometimes they're great. Other times they're not. Whether it be exhibiting in, elation or depression, or, happiness and sadness or anger. So that is something that is very observable. Both states began abruptly, ended spontaneously, and were highly likely to recur. There was no progressive mental deterioration. I mean, it didn't get any worse. It stayed pretty much the same. However, nor was there any physiological pathology. Both body and mind seemed to work normally, except for the mood states. So, again, that was something that they couldn't say was a physical thing. So, now we're opening the door to some psychology here. Dementia Praecox. Kraepelin's name for this category signified its two major characteristics: dementia, complete mental deterioration, and Praecox, onset at an early age, generally before the age of 25. Deterioration was steady, and the disorder was usually incurable. The final stage was not necessarily death, but rather the very lowest level of social and psychological functioning. And, as in the manic-depressive psychosis, physiological malfunction did not occur. So that they were still like, well, we're not quite sure what that's about. Kraepelin believed that his two diagnostic categories met the criteria of a useful classification schema, which at the time it did. It was your first, sorting these people into, okay, well, this is happening with these people, but this is happening with these people. So it was your first, categorization of mental illness. Kraepelin believed that his two diagnosis categories, we got that far, they were fully descriptive and they aided in determining the prognosis, or final outcome. He further believed that, since the disorders had been identified, it would soon be possible to discover their causes. He himself had some ideas on the subject, as, most scientists do. That's why they get into that. He thought that manic-depressive psychosis probably resulted from a metabolism dysfunction. Of course, now we know that's not true. The dementia Praecox was the result of a dysfunction of the sex glands. And now, he wasn't altogether off, as we'll figure out when we get further into this. Despite his and countless other attempts to find specific categories for these two major disorders, no exact cause was identified for either problem. But now we know that for bipolar, the chemical imbalance in the brain is the problem. But back in his day, they just didn't know. Nevertheless, Kraepelin's two categories are still as useful today as when he first developed them. Support for Kraepelin's system received a boost in his own day. A series of independent medical discoveries undertaken about that same time linked the distinct psychological disorder known as general paresis to the organic disease syphilis. First, the distinguishing symptoms of a general paresis were established. Then those who exhibited these symptoms were grouped together according to Kraepelin's guidelines. Viennese psychiatrist Richard von Krafft-Ebing then made the conclusive experiment. He demonstrated that people with general paresis were immune to syphilis, and I don't even know how he did that, because that means he was exposing them to it. And like I said, the 1800s science world was not a fun place to be the guinea pig in. Which indicated they were already infected with syphilis. Eventually, it was fully understood that general paresis was actually an advanced stage of the syphilitic infection of the central nervous system. And I don't know if you know anything about syphilis, but there's these like little spirochetes that get in your brain, and you end up in a bad shape. Ultimately, a cure, penicillin, was discovered as well. So nowadays, you get VD, you go to the doctor, and they're like, oh yeah, you got VD, and you get penicillin shots, and, things get taken care of. So, that's thankfully something that has come around to something that's basically treatable. So, the beautiful simplicity of the general paresis case had another effect. It led most clinicians of that time to agree with Kraepelin that all mental disorders were essentially organic diseases. And of course, most of them are. Now, there are psychological diseases that are caused by reactions to, trauma or other things. So it's a little more complicated than they thought back in the late 1800s, but they were onto something. They started something. They were convinced that, with time, grouping people according to Kraepelin's schema would lead to the discovery of both the organic cause and the organic cure for the full spectrum of mental illness. And it was a start. This belief in the disease model of psychopathology is an important factor in the development of both our current classification schema and our present management techniques. So, these early guys, they started it all. They got the ball rolling. The validity of the disease model. It would be hard to overestimate the influence of Kraepelin's classification system. Today's most widely used diagnostic tool, the listing of all mental disorders that is published by the American Psychiatric Association, is based directly on his initial work. Indeed, although the several revisions of the DSM have all listed more than just 2 categories of disturbance, the similarities are still apparent. Because, we said, he got the idea of classifying people. All these people exhibit this. All these people exhibit this. So, even though he had only 2 categories, which we all know there's a lot more mental illnesses than 2, he was on to something. He started something. Number 1, Kraepelin's 2 categories, dementia, Praecox, and manic depression, although given new names, such as schizophrenia and the affective disorders, are still the most serious and frequently seen forms of disturbances. Number 2, the symptom patterns that he distinguished for these 2 groups have remained essentially unchanged. Number 3, new categories that were added as a result of our growing knowledge about psychopathology are still grouped by overt behavior as Kraepelin advised. Because, most people with manic-depressive symptoms, bipolar symptoms, have the same behaviors. Most people with schizophrenia have the same behaviors. Most people with affective disorders, same behaviors. Most people with PTSD, same behaviors. So, once you start looking across the board at folks, it's easier to classify them as having this thing, or this other thing. Just like, you go to your medical doctor and you're having chest pains and they're looking at your heart first and then maybe your lungs second. They got this stuff figured out, and that's a good thing. Number 4, both categories classify mental disorders as a subject of organic disease. That is, they assume the validity of the disease model. So, it's not just people crazy, nuts, mad, insane. They started to realize, there's a reason for this stuff. There's a reason why these people are acting like this and doing this. Now, 100 years prior, they were more worried about the, gross tissue damage or whatever. By this time in the late 1800s, they're figuring out there's more going on in there than, just problems with the way things are formed or damage, so they're starting to realize all mental illnesses are not created equal. There are different ones, and you can group people by their behaviors, and that's why I talk about people. Your behavior tells a whole lot about you, a lot more than you think it does. For someone who studied psychology, your behaviors are a tell. It's like people who are gambling and they have a tell. If they're bluffing or whatever. But your behaviors are a tell. And people who are in the know can say, oh. And that's, like I said, a counselor that I worked with years ago. I was in her practice with her and helping her too. Told me, when you get into that, it's going to become an occupational hazard. You're going to psychoanalyze everybody. So, and it is. Like I say, sometimes it's all you can do because ethically you're not supposed to say, oh, you know what? I think you got this. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to only work with people who ask for your help. And so, it's hard sometimes to bite your tongue and not say, well, you know what? You need some help. I think you got this and you need to go talk to somebody. So, that's a problem. But that's how it all got started. And thankfully we got away from, your humors and, things are out of order and we need to drill holes in your head, let the devil out. To the point where we realize, hey, there's something going on in your brain that's messed up. And we can look at that and we can maybe find ways to treat that. So, That's a good thing. And that's where I'm going to leave you for today. I hope that helped you figure out maybe a little bit more about why you do what you do. Please like and share this educational program, and that's all it is, an educational program. It is not designed to diagnose or treat. If anything has triggered you, or you feel like is something that you might have a concern that is affecting your life, by all means, please contact your mental health professional to look into that. Like I say, thanks for watching. That's all for now, or listening. Until next time.